If you're female, there's about a 92% chance that you personally knew the person who killed you. I get your point. It's an
Yeah.
interesting, but I just think that is one of those things that when this is all over, I most want to understand is how
Yeah.
those pieces of information come together because I can't
Yeah.
swear it.
A forensic psychologist spends 15 minutes building an entire suspect profile using nothing but statistics, without reading a single line of the actual investigative file. Then, near the end of a 4-hour conversation, he admits there's one piece of this case his own logic can't explain. Let's look at both and check how far that pure theory actually holds up against what the FBI has confirmed on the record. I'm Marcus Wren, the creator of the Tell Index, a framework for analyzing statements and behavior in criminal cases. Today's video is a little different. Instead of analyzing a news interview, we're breaking down part of a long-form expert panel, what a real profiling process actually sounds like, and one moment where even the expert running it hits a wall. Hit subscribe if you want to see more analysis like this. Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, disappeared from her home in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona overnight on January 31st into February 1st. This video's source is different from anything we've broken down before. It's a live stream panel discussion over 4 hours long, hosted by The Interview Room, featuring 4 retired homicide detectives with decades of combined experience, and Dr. Gary Brucato, a clinical and forensic psychologist who has consulted on major violent crime cases. This recording was made roughly 10 weeks into the investigation, before several major developments that came later. The 2 clips used today come from 2 different points in that same conversation. The first is where Dr. Brucato walks through, out loud, exactly how a forensic psychologist thinks through a case using statistics rather than guesswork, built entirely from public footage, with no access to any internal case file. The second is a moment much later, where he flags something that doesn't add up to him. Right before this point, the panel had been discussing crime scene procedure. One of the detectives asks Dr. Brucato when a forensic psychologist's kind of thinking actually comes into play. This is where he begins to answer.
If you're female, there's about a 92% chance that you personally knew the person who killed you. Okay, that's extremely important. So about 92% of women, it is estimated, who are killed by their boyfriend, their husband, or a former romantic partner, or a family member, right? 8 out of 10 sexual assaults are committed by somebody who knew you. That's extremely important. Then you say, okay, well, let's start with the sexual motivation, okay? Somebody broke in to attack an 84-year-old woman sexually. Somebody in the chat suggested it. Okay, first of all, statistically speaking, the kind of person who would do that is very, very rare. There are only, in the United States in 2024, the last time I know this data to have been released, there were only, I have the number, actually, I wrote it down. There were 381 killings of people older than 75 years old in the United States. Okay, already extremely rare. Then embedded within that, what's the probability of a sexual assault on that individual? Minuscule, tiny. Then you have the fact that a sexual assault by a stranger is actually, it does happen, but the idea is you have to look at the age range at which it tends to happen. Okay, so first of all, you're super rare when you're at the level of that age. And statistics tell us that the person will be most likely, who would do that would be most likely to be a family member. And about 70% of the time when it happens to elders, it happens in a nursing home or in your own home. Okay? Now, so what does that tell you? That the notion of an outsider coming in and attacking an elderly woman, sexually assaulting her and killing her, you're now taking unlikely on top of unlikely on top of unlikely on top of, and you get down to something that would be like extremely profoundly rare. Okay? Then you add on top of that the fact that the statistics tell us that if somebody were to do that, they would be likely to do it serially. So then you say, okay, How many sexually assaulting serial killers are there in the United States at any given time? It's estimated there are about 250. So we would be suggesting that one of those 250 approximately killers, who are most likely male, right, are breaking into a home to sexually assault a woman and kill her. Then what would you say? You'd say statistically, most likely that person has done it before, is probably somewhere in the records of prior sex offending, or probably has been arrested before, because they're going to keep doing it. And within a geographic area, you're going to start to see a popping up of more cases of it, right? You all see where I'm going with this? Rare. So forget that one. Throw that one out the window. It's very, now, is it possible? Of course. It's also possible I'll walk outside and a piano will fall on my head, but it's not probable. Okay, so let's put that over there. Then you say, what about the possibility of abduction? Okay, there are 350 abductions approximately a year in the United States. That's it. And out of them, the vast majority of them are children. And when they are children, believe it or not, most of them are taken by people who know them. There is only a 0.001% chance that when you are abducted as a child, that you're being sent off to sexual slavery or held as a sexual slave in someone's home or any of those things. But the public's imagination goes to that stuff. Super rare. Even rarer than that, an elderly woman being abducted for non-sexual reasons. Also extremely improbable. The most likely scenario, because it happens 1 million times a year or more in the United States, is there is a financial motive. And as I said, statistics tell us if you have a female individual who is killed or sexually assaulted in the United States, they know the person who did it to them. Now we couple that with the comfort that we see on that video, the fact that we've deduced from the timeline that this person spent a great deal of time in that house. There's no evidence of there having been a robbery, because we don't know of anything having been taken. And an abduction also seems ridiculous, because if you're abducting a person for money, you sort of want them intact. You don't want them bleeding. You would take their medication. You don't leave their meds and have a stopped pacemaker. So then you start saying, okay, well, based on probability, if it's somebody who knows you and the most likely thing is financial, then you would look at the inner circle of people who know you.
Notice what he's actually doing. He never starts from a face or a behavior. He starts from base rates, the plain statistical odds of every category of crime, and only narrows toward a specific kind of offender once the unlikely categories have been ruled out one at a time. It's the exact opposite of the gut-feeling approach true crime commentary usually leans on. Right after this segment, he shifts to applying that same framework directly to the doorbell camera footage of the unidentified visitor at Nancy Guthrie's door.
Okay, so then once you get down to that, then we look at this video and we start saying, okay, well, this person is on the screen. What can we feel out about this person? So, Chris, if you put the video up, if you don't mind, on the screen. Now, let me emphasize that person who knows you could mean anything. Doesn't have to be super intimate. They just know you. Could be a person who worked with you. Could be the mailman. Could be the guy who cleaned the pool. You guys know what I mean? Could be. So when we're giving those statistics, we mean somebody has more than a passing connection with you. They're going to know some stuff about you. So then when you look at this offender, what you want to do is try to imagine the psychology based partially on that person's intelligence. The first thing I do when I think about something, I have to step into that person's intelligence level, right? So this is not a person based on using the flowers in front of the camera and some of the other getting caught on the camera after, and all this other stuff. You start thinking, okay, the person's intelligent enough to kind of get away with this, but this is a person who did some planning and still did some pretty stupid things here, right? So this is not a top rate intelligence here, right? I mean, we would all agree, right? We're not dealing with Stephen Hawking here, right? Am I correct about that? Okay. I mean, this is not Stephen Hawking. And then, so the first thing that I would thinking about is you're dealing with a person who probably isn't the brightest bulb in the entire world. So we already are getting a feel for a person. Then you start thinking about the outfit that the person brought and the things that they did that don't make a lot of sense, like the holster, the way that the holster is being held, and the way that the gun doesn't match the holster, and all that kind of behavior. And you start thinking to yourself, additionally, this may not be a professional. So you have an unprofessional quality on top of not being especially bright. Then you have the fact that he looks so cool that you think, is this guy stoned? Is he some kind of psychopath? Now, I have to tell you, when I see a person who is doing something like this without looking scared at all, I start thinking they're a little bit on the psychopathic side, because there's no concern at all, nothing. Beyond not wanting to get caught and stopped, there doesn't seem to be any threat that is causing this person to have physiological symptoms of nervousness. So then you start saying, why is that person's nervous system not acting normally? Even if any one of us planned, with everything we know about crime, decided we were going to go and do something like this, we would be a little nervous, a little bit. This person looks like they're taking a stroll in the park. I don't agree with the person in the audience who says that that's all BS. I don't agree. I think these things are all logical. So, and if you don't agree with any of this, please tell me in terms of my thought process here. So my sense is this guy, based on what I'm seeing on the screen, looks like this is not his first rodeo with crime. He's probably committed home invasions before and has a kind of callous disregard. That can also be glimpsed by the fact that this person did what he did with an 84-year-old person, right? And looks like that, knowing that this is an 84-year-old victim, right? That's going to be bleeding and taken out of the house and everything else. So already we get a sense of a person who is callous. If you are a person who is callous, you don't become that kind of person at this person's approximate age. Chances are you have a sociopathic character structure that's going to go all the way back to the time you're a kid. Conduct disorder precedes antisocial personality features, and you tend to see that stuff going back a long way. Now, why is that important? Because this person probably is going to have a history of prior criminal behavior.
From there, he reasons for roughly another 7 minutes through more specific details. Whether this person eats fast food, whether local sex workers might recognize a client's particular behavior, whether this is the type of person who's known locally for losing his temper in public, before landing on his final conclusion, most likely a local and more likely acting on behalf of someone smarter behind the scenes than acting alone. Cross-checking this against the case file, and this is the part that matters most. Everything above was built by Dr. Brucato from public footage alone, with no access to the internal investigative file. So how far does it actually hold up against what the FBI has confirmed on the record? Per the FBI's own forensic review of the Nest doorbell footage, the suspect is described as male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, average build, wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker backpack, meaning there was at least some specific equipment preparation, not pure improvisation. Just as Dr. Brucato predicted the clumsiness, the public record also confirms the suspect first tried blocking the camera with a gloved hand, failed, then went back for a piece of shrubbery. Exactly the kind of planned but executed clumsily sequence he described. There's one notable point of disagreement, though. Retired FBI profiler Candace DeLong, interviewed by CNN in mid-February, described the suspect in a partly opposite direction. She said pulling off something like this requires being enormously confident in yourself, and used the term narcissistic psychopath. That's an interesting tension between two experts. Dr. Brucato leans toward not especially bright, below-average planner, while DeLong leans toward overconfident narcissistic. The two readings aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but they emphasize different traits, and no channel in this space appears to have placed those two assessments side by side before. On the DNA side, agents also recovered a pair of gloves roughly 2 miles from the scene containing DNA from an unidentified male, which was run through CODIS with no match, then sent out for genealogical testing. That partly confirms and partly complicates Dr. Brucato's reasoning. If this person really does have a prior record, as he speculates, The DNA should have matched something already in CODIS. The lack of a match suggests either this person has never been formally arrested and sampled, or any prior record they do have was never connected to a DNA sample in the system. This next clip comes from a completely different part of the same conversation, much later, after a long Q&A with the live chat.
One of the great puzzles of this case for me psychologically is that if all the facts as they're stated are true, we have a scenario where law enforcement thought that a person might have wandered off, and the family immediately knew that somebody was abducted because of Savannah. I mean, that's the narrative. That police looked at it and took them a little while to figure out, oh, this might have been an abduction, but the family knew like that. And I can't wrap my head around how that could be how could those two pieces of information be true at the same time? I mean, hasn't that puzzled you guys?
I totally agree with you.
It makes absolutely no sense unless you're remembering it that way because of some psychological, thing that people tend to do when they look back on something. But I cannot square those two pieces of information. It bothers
I wonder if, so is that why Savannah called Senator Mark Kelly to call the sheriff? Because they were in the process of the search and rescue, and the family is trying to tell the sheriff, no, this is not a walk away. Something else happened. So you get my point, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah,
I get your point. It's an interesting, but I just think that is one of those things that when this is all over, I most want to understand is how those two pieces of information come together, because I can't square it.
This is worth sitting with, because it's the one moment in over 4 hours where the person who just demonstrated such disciplined statistical reasoning in round one runs into something his own framework doesn't explain. Cross-checking this against the case file, this contradiction actually has a specific timeline behind it. Sheriff Chris Nanos initially stated publicly that the Nest camera on Nancy's door had disconnected just before 2 a.m. the night she disappeared, and that although the software detected movement minutes later, no footage had been preserved. In part, he said, because Nancy didn't have an active paid cloud subscription with Nest. That initial statement created the impression of a cautious, even technically limited, law enforcement posture. Just days later, on February 10th, then FBI Director Kash Patel publicly released recovered images of the suspect, saying they'd been retrieved from the company's back-end systems, meaning the footage had, in fact, existed and been recoverable all along, directly at odds with Nanos's earlier statement. The gap, Doctor. Brucato is pointing it may partly trace back to exactly this. Local law enforcement working through the technical process available to them at the time, while the family, working from private knowledge of Nancy's health and habits, reacted with far more urgency from the start. It's worth being fair here, and only once in this video. Memory and reporting about the earliest hours of any case are notoriously unreliable. People describe timelines differently after the fact, and early informal impressions can coexist messily with someone else's more urgent private fear, without either one being dishonest. But it's also true that a trained forensic psychologist working from the same public reporting we all have access to considered it puzzling enough to flag on air rather than wave away, which is itself worth noticing. 15 minutes of careful statistical reasoning, built one probability at a time, mostly matching what the FBI later confirmed on the record, with one interesting point of disagreement from another FBI expert, and one contradiction raised by the same expert that his own method couldn't resolve. Do you think that gap has a simple explanation, or is it a real clue that's been sitting in plain sight? Leave a comment below. I read everyone. And hit subscribe to see more analysis like this.